Water, it's the stuff of life, indispensable, precious, and becoming much harder to preserve. Have we taken it for granted? Ignored warnings we're now paying a terrible price for as some parts of Aotearoa dry out. Our decision makers are scrambling, and just over 2 months out from the election, the minister in charge won't talk. Soon we'll hear from farmers in the Hawke's Bay who are hurting badly. But first, John Hudson reports that no matter how wet it seems now, next summer Auckland could run out of water.
It's been bucketing down in Auckland for weeks. The city has been drenched, gutters overflowing.
So I heard believe that the city of Sails is running out of water.
We are going to face a very, very difficult time in Auckland, and that will have major consequences nationally. Sad, but true.
Another side of infrastructure, one that typically is both out of sight and out of mind, is water. It's something we just expect to be there when we turn on the faucet, when we flush the toilet, or when we go to water the lawn. But it's infrastructure that rockets back to the forefront as soon as we're confronted with a dwindling supply.
Auckland is on the cusp of an emergency water crisis as it stares down the barrel of the region's worst drought in 25 years, with reservoirs at just 43%. The Auckland Council is scrambling to secure extra water sources as it continues to plead with Aucklanders to conserve water inside their homes. It's a race against time as region's water reservoirs continue to dry out, and with no significant rainfall in sight, time is running out. This from Annika Smith and cameraman Simon Rogers.
Driving through the rolling hills of Henua, you'd never guess the region was in the grip of a severe drought. The landscape is green, bright grass covering farmland, but things are very different beneath the surface. Local farmers Bruce and Dot Chipman meet me on their neighbour David Hill's back deck for a cup of tea and some ginger nuts. The Chipman family celebrated 100 years on their farm last year. Bruce and Dot have carried on a tradition of keeping handwritten rain records and vintage stationery books.
Okay, yes, so the record started in 62, and of course, it was points and inches, so daily records there of the rain, with a comment on what the weather was like each day.
Light shower.
Yeah, light fog, heavy dew.
Mist,
fine.
frost.
Yeah, showers each day, fine and cloudy.
In the Chipman's 60 years' worth of records, annual rainfall in the region has only dipped below 1,000 millimetres 5 times. The first in 1982, then 83, and a decade later in 1993. Annual rainfall was also less than 1,000 millimetres last year, and this year is tracking to be the same.
The last 12 months till the beginning of June was 966 mils. Our average is 1,300. The year prior to that was in the 900 mils as well, so we've got 2 years of extremely dry weather.
This year's dry spell is made all the more serious because, according to the Chipman's records, the Henua region missed out on about 350 millimetres of rainfall last year. And while the odd bit of rainfall over the past month means pastures now look green, the earth itself is bone dry. David Hill shows me a photograph of what the locally renowned Porcupine Hill looked like in February.
It's a lot drier there, isn't it?
Well, look at this. You know, if you were a cow, you'd look at me and say, "You've got to be kidding, David. I can't. There's nothing for me there to eat."
30 minutes up the road, the walls of the upper Mangatangi Dam are dry and exposed. It's one of 9 water storage reservoirs in the Waitakere and Henua ranges that supply about 60% of Auckland's water. This week, they dropped to a record low of 43% full. If you're watching this story, at this time of the year, the water should ideally be up to this tree line. Much has been said about just how serious this is for the wider region, but James Talbot from Watercare puts it best. As operations controller for the Henua Headworks, he's on the ground day in and day out, working in the forest around the reservoirs.
I've had a few people come to me and ask me, is the situation being overhyped by the media? And the message from me personally is absolutely not. We are definitely staring down the barrel of a potentially very serious water shortage situation.
The past few months have been the driest on record for Auckland, seeing its reservoirs drop below halfway full for the first time since the 1994 water crisis. Since then, levels have teetered between 40 to 45% full, as Watercare, Auckland Council's water company, has scrambled to secure new water sources. Just this week, it used emergency powers to draw a further 15 million litres of water a day from the Waikato River, bringing the total daily pull to 165 million litres. Watercare is also building a new reservoir in Pukekohe and will bring the Hayes Creek Dam back into action by August. But time is running out, and all of these projects will only secure a very small fraction of the more than 400 million litres of water Aucklanders use every day.
Much like the housing crisis, we didn't get here by chance. While there is an element of water supply that is left to chance, that is, the amount of rain and snowfall each year, our own planning decisions have a significant impact on the availability of water in our urban areas.
Water is extremely critical for Auckland or any city, any community. Water is life.
In New Zealand, the rain falls mainly on the mountains, then gushes into lakes and rivers.
Hooker Falls, billions of litres of fresh water cascading down the Waikato River every day, enough to meet the needs of all New Zealanders many times over. So why is it that our largest city is facing a water crisis?
To have the tragedy of running Auckland out of water, the New Zealand's biggest economic engine, when it could easily have been avoided, is an absolute tragedy.
Dave Clark has been sounding the alarm for years.
This is 16 billion litres, I think.
Ever since he was chair of Watercare Auckland.
In 2013, we predicted that a shortage could occur in years 2021, 22 and 23.
Back then, Auckland was using hundreds of millions of litres of water a day. A shortage was unacceptable. They had to find more water, and fast.
Your engineers, your consultants looked at all the sources of potential water in Auckland, is that right?
77 of them, and the Waikato River was by far the easiest for access, the most economic. We have a water source just on the doorstep of Auckland, hugely reliable, with a massive flow.
The mighty Waikato. 30 billion litres of precious water flow down here and out to the Tasman every day. Auckland was already taking 150 million litres a day. They asked for 200 million more.
So you went for Waikato water?
Yep.
And what happened?
There was no access to a consent or even a consent hearing to take less than 1% from the Waikato River for almost a decade. And why we're facing this water shortage now is due to one factor, and that's a lack of a consent. And we waited and we waited and we're still waiting.
Without that vital extra water supply in place, Auckland is increasingly exposed to drought. The city's reservoirs should look like this in July. But right now, they look like this, the lowest levels in 25 years.
All the predictions are that the lakes cannot and will not replenish themselves before next summer. The consequences of that are dramatic.
So folks, even though it's raining now, you're in real trouble next summer.
One thing we have to do, in my opinion, is make it very clear to Aucklanders is that we're about to go into a crisis next summer that could be far, far worse than you ever imagined.
It's still only midwinter, but Watercare has been putting restrictions in place since May, and that's already hitting businesses in the pocket.
We went into a bit of a panic, to be honest. You go through that whole process of like, how's this going to pan out?
Murray Robertson has carefully built up his house cleaning firm, Super City Properties, to employ 26 people. What does your business mean to you and your staff?
Everything. It's my whole world. It's how we live. It's how the people that work in it live. and we are like a family at work.
But Watercare's recent restrictions have put his business in jeopardy.
It does feel as though our industry has been targeted. There's been many sleepless nights. I mean, you're trying to resolve problems all the time.
The new rules mean Supercity can no longer use water from client properties and must fill up with non-drinkable water. Extra costs at a bad time.
How much did this new gear actually cost you?
In the vicinity of $35,000.
Yeah, thanks very much. Okay. How much time is it taking to follow these new procedures?
A team of 2 would probably lose around about 2 production hours a day. So that's 4 man-hours a day that I'll be losing.
Some house cleaners have simply shut down.
Well, you sort of scratch your head a little bit and think, well, there's my livelihood almost flushed straight down the toilet.
Alistair McIndoe is now chimney sweeping to make ends meet. His house cleaning business is on hold.
I don't really understand why they're targeting such a small industry. I can't sort of get my head around how saving the amount of water that we use is actually going to have an effect on the water levels at all.
And I'm saying the world is changing, mate. We have to change our behaviours. And the days of using quality drinking water to wash houses and cars in car yards are probably over. Yes,
Watercare's CEO Raveen Jadduram started asking Aucklanders to use less water back in February.
You don't think you could have had those restrictions earlier and avoided some of what's going on now?
No, because everything we're doing right now is for the coming summer.
But it may be too little, too late.
And it's a tragedy. We could have put capacity into the system that would have alleviated the vast majority of the crisis we're going to have and are having now.
So how did it get to this? Why did Auckland have to wait 7 years and still not get a hearing for water that it now desperately needs? Well, to put it simply, it's down to the law, a law called the Resource Management Act.
So the way the RMA works for allocating water is that whoever comes first gets, that application gets processed first.
First in, first served.
First in, first served. We were over 200 in the queue when we applied. We are 106 now. And the Waikato Regional Council has to process them in that order.
That seems like an incredibly slow process.
Absolutely.
There's something fundamentally flawed with a process that doesn't even give you a hearing after almost a decade.
No one owns the Waikato River's water, but the Regional Council and local iwi do have a major say in deciding how it's used.
How important is the river to Tainui?
It's critical to our well-being, which is why we are doing all we can to protect it while trying to find solutions that address Auckland's water supply issues.
Rukumoana Schaffhausen is the chair of Te Arataura, Waikato Tainui's executive board. She says her iwi has a legal obligation to protect and improve the river.
Watercare say that the 200 million litres a day take would have next to no environmental impact. Do you agree with that?
No, that sort of take would definitely have an impact on the ecological and cultural aspects of the awas.
Do you think people should have to pay for water?
I do believe there needs to be a sustainable funding mechanism that, where the benefactor of that is the river, to ensure the well-being and the health of the river. We know the problems that exist here.
Waikato Tainui says Auckland needs to contribute more financially to the restoration of the river. Others suggest charging the city 10 cents a litre, but Auckland Mayor Phil Goff rejected that.
Oh, totally ridiculous. $20 million a day, $140 million a week. That's just crazy stuff.
Some people see this as Tainui and Waikato holding Auckland to ransom. What do you say to them?
Yeah, not at all. A number of our tribal members reside in Auckland. We are not holding anybody to ransom, but we will demand more of all those parties to come together to address the long-term issues.
This month, Environment Minister David Parker invoked emergency powers to fast-track Auckland's application for another 200 million litres a day of Waikato River water. But that hearing could take another 9 months. We wanted to talk to David Parker on camera, but he declined our invitation.
In the meantime, local politicians are trying to finalise a deal to get Auckland at least some extra water before next summer.
You've got to understand, to replenish the lakes by 10%, you have to put 150 million litres a day in for 100 days. And that's not going to happen.
No matter how much it rains in Auckland, it can't rain enough. Since 2013, when Watercare first applied for more water from the Waikato River, the region has grown by around 250,000 people, and they all need water.
So no matter what happens now, Auckland will still face the possibility of running out of water next summer.
It is highly unlikely that the water that we need to replenish the lakes will enter the system either from the skies or from the river. And we are going to face a very, very difficult time in Auckland, and that will have major consequences nationally. Sad, but true.
When we fail to plan adequately for times of reduced snow and rainfall, or the lean times and when we don't invest in the needed infrastructure, or when we underestimate or don't estimate at all the impact of population growth, we fail to plan for future demand. When we don't plan for demand, we risk falling into another crisis.
Bide your time for another one. A typhoon